still on the emotion part of the chapter. I've highlighted, looking at some of the questions here I've asked, but I will bold what's relevant and I'll just say it because I just went through it now.
Mm-hmm.
All right, are you up to where I'm at?
Let me make sure.
Page 6.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
A young boy feels his subconscious, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, that's the one.
In regard to his mother, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. Based on premises. Yeah, I would agree. It's not something self-evident. It's not something, it's not like immediately conceptually obvious, and doesn't have any prior, you would want to think about, does it have any prior premises, prior concepts you need to understand to identify an emotion? Does having an emotion imply something else? What does it imply? It would imply saying having mental states, having a consciousness, things like that. And you could say those are what it's dependent on. The content of emotion is dependent on those, grasping those things, at least implicitly.
Is there any discussion in that you know of? I don't even know if I assume it would be a discussion in psychology, but maybe in philosophy too, of like, like something like even why do you like this jacket as opposed to that jacket? Like it's almost impossible to know what is the underlying premise of that. Like if you're thinking in those terms, is that even applicable anymore? Like this whole idea of emotions are based in reason. The evaluations are based on content that was reasoned into. Like, and then when you think of those things, like, why do I like, that jacket as opposed to that other jacket or whatever? I remember there was sort of got touched on in one of the posts I made where someone said like, well, maybe your taste buds are different, so you like this ice cream over that ice cream, and it's like it's not. Yeah, with stuff like that, you don't really know. Like you could just say, oh, well, it must be based in thought, so I must find the premise. But there's no, what if there's no premise?
I've seen different ways of answering that question. Like you saw that there, there's not, I think that's one of the questions that there's more disagreement on than other subjects within objectivism. Like, I think that is something disagreed upon, exactly in what nature do we consider those related to your conscious thinking, or what sense are they chosen? In what sense do they actually have an impact on our lives? Do they really count as this type of content we're talking about when we're discussing emotions and choices and values? And that's really where the disagreement comes down. I'm with you in seeing that there's a really big complexity to it. It's not any like, oh, my mom treated me badly, therefore I like brown jackets. Like that would be a weird way of looking at it. It would be a much more complex interaction of things since your birth, or even associations or flavors and random things even that you would be even hard to distinguish as an adult. Like even discussions about sexuality, what makes somebody develop their sexuality is a question like that. Do you say it's just a biological thing, or do you say to some extent it's influenced by choices, or it's to some extent influenced by different exposures you've had in your life? Not necessarily bad, just different ways of seeing.
You broke up.
Things. And can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can. You just got cut off for a while. You said different ways of seeing things.
Yeah, I mean, that could happen throughout your life, for minor choices you made growing up, that it'd be hard to get an idea of the sum of your choices, of what they are.
Yeah.
And it'd be hard to pinpoint. And I'm not sure you really could do a analysis of how your value judgments have influenced, like your enjoyment of the color green or purple or brown or whatever it might be, in the same way that it's hard to make a judgment about sexuality, because it could be a sum of a huge amount of choices, and minor ones, even biology to some extent, that we can't really distinguish that. And that might be going to a different concept within objectivism, which is sense of life, which is more related to aesthetics, that kind of a wide sum of evaluations and choices and values throughout your life that reflect like your personality, the way you certain art you like, certain different little things that we can't really just give a rational immediate analysis, like start listing everything that led to that, but rather it's a sum of choices and a sum of life events and even things you've experienced and some of your way of evaluating your life and all that. A huge sum of information that makes you.
Yeah, we'll get onto sense of life too. I was going to ask you, but before I asked you, I said I should read. Like, it seemed speculative to me, that whole sense of life thing. It seemed like,
Right.
but when we get onto that, when I've actually read more about it and I have some specifics in front of me, it's a discussion I can get
Yeah.
into.
You just need to think of it as like a totality of the sum of your values and choices that kind of is like a personality in a way that you can't have one point where you chose to be that way. It's like a huge amount of information made you who you are.
Yeah. When it says here negative value judgment, is that so a negative value judgment can be both an emotion and an actual thought, right? Like you can say that if you say this is bad for me, like assuming that's a thought, then that's a negative value judgment, but it also you can feel it, right? So it could be either a thought or an emotional reaction when it says it in this context. Like
Yeah, the
young boy.
way Peacock is using the term, I would agree. I would be a little more careful thinking of judgments as more conscious evaluations, like a decision. It's not itself an emotion. You can call it like is like an emotion, but the judgment is what leads to the emotion. I think would be a more precise way to put it. I think here he's saying you don't just fill your subconscious with those judgments producing the emotions, or you can fill your subconscious with those value judgments, and that would produce the emotion. I think that
Wouldn't
might be a
have
more precise way to look at it.
What about so because how I currently understand it is your emotions are automated
Yes.
evaluations of facts based on content, and that content was formed through judgment, or that content was put there through conscious judgment. So then couldn't you say that an emotion is a value judgment because it doesn't mean it's true, it's evaluating facts in relation to the content, whether or not that content is true or false.
More
Like,
like a consequence of a value judgment that's become
ah.
automatized.
Okay, because if you once you start saying evaluation, wait, well, I don't know. Once you start saying judgment, you're talking about like conscious volitional
Yeah.
thought process.
Well, I mean it like this. Say you see spiders, you judge them as dangerous. You say spiders are dangerous, therefore I should avoid them. And it can become automatized in a way that not only do you immediately judge that they're um, dangerous, but you get the feeling with it as a result of those automatized judgments. It's become an emotion.
Yeah,
It led
but
there.
so is the emotion not a value judgment then? When you
That
feel
would
the
be
fear
hard to
of the
say,
spider,
but
is that if
just as a matter of precision in the wording, I would say it is not itself a judgment.
okay?
We'd have to only, if we use the word judgment, we need to understand or keep in mind that it is not a conscious evaluation. It's just the lightning fast result, like an automatized judgment is how you can
Okay,
think of it.
all right. Um, Yeah, I mean, like I guess now it's getting into therapy when he talks about what's wrong with me. He's talking about this guy who's like, I admire my mother. My mind tells me there is every reason to love her, but my heart doesn't listen. I hate her. What's wrong with me? What's wrong is that he doesn't know his mind. That is his actual operative value judgments. Um, yeah, I mean that's like it goes to what you can't like you almost can't remember those things, like, and then you feel something, I think. So it's not really philosophy at this point. I guess he's just making the point that all, at least from his perspective, every emotion is premised in thought. And I guess, as we said, that's all open to discussion in terms of subtleties of like, are all emotions based in thought or not, right? That's sort
It's
of the main.
possible that he was thinking of a patient and he didn't want to identify them specifically or something. It's possible if he was doing it that way, then it could make sense that somebody actually said that to him, that they asked, I don't know what's wrong with me. I
No,
mean,
no,
I could
he's
see
giving
some,
an example. It is an example.
yeah,
I'm just pointing out that it's like the it's just like it shows you the actual. He's talking about how emotions are not inexplicable demons, right? That was sort of the
yeah.
point of, and I'm saying, well, they actually can be. Like, no, I agree, not all of them are, but they can. The story he's telling sort of shows that they can be. Um,
Yeah, I think only specific kinds can be. I do think you'd be right to say it gets complicated. You can't answer it in that way regarding, say, liking brown jackets or your personality or the way you might be cranky towards certain people or something like I don't know things like that that you
yeah,
can't
yeah,
really
yeah,
narrow it down to one thing, but you'd have to go a wider context here and start really getting into the psychology of it, not just this understanding that your judgments, your conscious value judgments are critical to your emotional functioning and processing. I mean, that's one thing, but then we get into all these much more details, understanding even to what extent does the history of your life impact your judgments. And it gets really complicated there. And I don't think it would be fair that philosophy to try to answer it beyond to say value judgments cause emotional, give emotional content or give emotional processes to
yeah,
start or something like that.
yeah. Okay. I think this next one I might skip because I've already asked it. Uh, okay, cool. I crossed that one out because I have discussed it with you.
Yeah, I mean, it's more an inferential process. That sounds right.
Okay, so this is the passage about reason. I sort of get it. Like, reason is our source of knowledge, according to this passage, and you form conclusions, including value judgments accordingly, and revise them when necessary. Then you experience the emotion. That is like a general overview. Um, my question is, which I don't think it's necessarily contradicting this passage, it's just for my understanding. Uh, don't you need to rely on your emotions to some extent? There are some things that you just don't like. What job should I work in? Like, well, you ask, what do I like? But there's no like pure reasoning process where you're like, you just reason your way into a job. Like your emotions do give you a lot of information that you need to work with, right? Otherwise,
Right.
like, there's like a million different, like, oh, maybe I should be a crab fisherman because crab fishermen, I don't know, like, I wouldn't even know where to begin. So it's like the subconscious on some level gives me like emotional, like the information it gives me is based in a bit of emotion. Like, okay, well, I once enjoyed that, or this thing came up, or I believe this. And so I'm just confused about that interaction between the two. Because on the one hand, it's like reason is our only source of knowledge. And then at the same time, I'm like, well, I do rely on emotions to some extent, as in not just to experience life. I get this saying you need emotions to experience life, but even to make decisions. So I'm trying to just reconcile the two. Like, how
I
does
think you're right. Just the word rely here, I think it's the issue. When do you rely on them or do you use them? I mean, there's a distinction there, I think. Like, when I say rely, it seems like it's the primary consideration when you say rely on. That's what it sounds like. And you don't want to have it as the primary consideration as much as
okay,
it
I
is
know
a
what you're saying.
consideration.
Okay.
And yeah,
So
it's relevant information. You need to use it. Ignoring it would be bad.
yeah. Um I
And
get
maybe also think of it, there's no dichotomy between reason and emotion. It's not like you choose reason or you choose emotion. they're not mutually exclusive. You can use reason, and by taking into account your emotions, reality, or different information. Reason doesn't imply that you're acting against emotion or ignoring something about emotion or ignoring something about your physical functioning or something like that. Rather, it's just the process of using the information available to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say, okay, if we're thinking of that example in terms of jobs, like someone could ask, okay, what jobs do I want to work? Maybe the answers, it gives you a set, your emotions gives you a set of answers, but they meet the criteria that reason is set. Like, let's exclude jobs that involve murder and theft and consider, like, and then your emotion will give you a couple of options and you're like, oh, that seems good. And you're like, so in a sense, like there's reason sets the frame, but then maybe emotions are like, and you can always check if like it makes sense or not.
Yes, that would
So
be, I think, more the right attitude, that you're not saying the emotions where you begin. It's like, do you trust your reason or do you trust your emotions? Like, your reasoning is a way to use your information, which includes your emotion.
yeah, right. Uh, what is it? I've got a quote up on my which I think, yeah, okay, Benjamin Franklin. If passion drives, let reason hold the reins. So I guess
Yeah,
that sort of fits into the, I got that
it
quote up.
does.
Okay,
Yep.
let's see. Something else I was going to ask you, but I just forgot. It might come to me later, so we can skip to the next question.
Sure.
Keep going back to this thing of like, I guess it's the same answer as before. Hey, what I've asked here, same answer as like the reason sets the terms and the frame and the framework, and then you can let emotions kind of guide you in other ways.
Yeah, like a controlled way. Like, you're aware of what your emotions are telling you and not letting them take control, but like letting them tell you things, but not letting them be like the decider. Like, it's just information, just like what you perceive in the world. It just tells you more.
Yeah. Okay, so I mean, this is already saying emotions play an essential role. I get this. One casts no aspersion on eating or breathing if one denies that they are means of cognition, which makes sense.
Mhm.
What do you think of this though? Like when you think of like a lot of professions that involve feeling, like to operate, it's I guess it's similar, but it's almost like the way even investors and traders talk about like gut feel. They don't define it more than that, unfortunately, but uh,
Right.
um,
Mm,
it's almost a separate question, this thing. But yeah, they're all talking about how that's an essential. Um, so I guess that doesn't there's no contradiction or anything conflicting here. I suppose that's just like collected observations stored as content, and then um, and then the evaluation takes place of that content in relation to whatever's happening.
mhm. I
Like if
mean, that sounds right.
and they've probably formed but yeah, I don't know, again, this is not philosophy now, like sports players, I don't even know, that's like muscle memory almost, it's not even concepts, but
Yeah, I would distinguish between, like, I'm not entirely sure exactly what feeling to operate would be here. Like, feeling could be the sense of like feeling what your muscles are doing. I mean, that's one sense of feeling, more like the physiological aspect, like, and you just use that to alter your movements or whatever, just
right,
using that information. I wouldn't really call that emotional.
yeah, okay,
But I know what you mean by like intuition, like a poker player has intuition sometimes about maybe who's bluffing or something like that. Yeah, that would be closer to intuition or emotion. So you just got to be careful the way what you're trying to refer to when you're referring to like feeling or emotion or what
Do
exactly
you
you're trying to refer to.
do you think that do you think that process of them using intuition, whether it's a sports player or poker player, recognizing a bluff, is that one that is dependent on concepts or associative content? And I'm making up that distinction, but I'm thinking of like, an animal like will be scared of something because he's been hurt or just knows to have, it's just sort of the association is run away when he sees this thing or whatever it is. That's the association based uh, approach. And then there's the
Yeah,
one of concepts of like recognizing like this generalized principle applies in this situation, which is conceptual. Like in the case of these people performing, whether it's investors, sports players, professional poker players, do you think it's out of the realm of concepts at that point? And we're talking about like some kind of associative process of like they've made observations and it's like, oh, this is similar to that other time, but it's not a concept, it's just that specific other time. Oh, this person has this micro expression, which I saw
I
last hand.
I don't really know. I think that's more a matter how you if you how you distinguish intuition versus emotion versus feeling. I like it as a third option. Like I don't think of it as either reason or emotion. I think it's just more like a consequence of conceptual thinking, less about associations. But I don't say that with confidence. I just say like you can't make those distinctions. You could definitely make an argument one way or the other, but it's definitely some sort of automatic process either way that we would want to think about in the same way as emotion, that it is not infallible, rather it just tells us information in a quick way, and we should be aware of what it may have come from or be aware of what it's dealing with. So intuition is usually dealing with something you would normally take more time to think about or consider, like if you're evaluating paintings or for authenticity or things like that. You just kind of get a feeling rather than anything else. But you would just recognize that it's a fallible process that isn't as volitional as reason might be. Reason is so important because it allows us to check things
Can
and
validate.
take this, yeah, because we can validate or double check. Intuition, you can't double check it. You just have to use reasons. It is what it is, but then you can fix it or think about it or whatnot.
I just found something that's relevant here, but it's a bit of a rabbit hole, but we don't have to go too deeply into it. There's a research study done called the Iowa gambling task,
Mm-hmm.
and these are their terms, so we have to just try and they proved that unconscious learning exists, and they're saying they basically gave them they say unconscious learning starts as a small, this isn't their words, it's mine, I summarized it, as a small unconscious difference in stress reactions grows into a hunch and eventually turns into a conscious recognition. So it's something about they gave them cards and different decks, and somehow they were able by, I'd have to find it, they were able by just flipping through multiple decks or whatever, start to
Yeah, I
pick up
know
on
it.
like,
So
oh, you do know, oh, you probably know it
mhm.
better than me then. Yeah, but like that, because I thought when I read that, I was like, that's not concept, you know?
Yeah, I mean that is interesting to think about how you can establish connections and associations. And I think, yeah, it's not conceptual. It's kind of just guess and check, and like as you go, you just get a sense of how things are operating in a way you might think of it as like preconceptual thought, like it's noticing regularities, but not in conceptual terms. And you probably by looking at it, you could see why you would want to say things in conceptual terms. Because if you're just using intuition, you can't really repeat the process. You can't generalize. You can't do anything other than just this sense of seeing something before. So it can tell you some information, but I think you're right. It wouldn't be conceptual because, well, it just came from just associative processes that probably automatic. Animals probably use the same thing,
Yeah.
but it could show you the value of concepts that if you did make it conceptual, if you notice what the pattern is and identify it, it's probably much easier to think about, quicker to use, and could be generalized to other situations.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would sort of explain. Yeah. So a lot of people in trading might be very good intuitively, but then when things change, they might not continue because I guess they're just sort of specialized associations in one thing.
Yeah.
There's no overall big picture view of it. But yeah, I mean, okay, cool. This is pretty speculative though. I guess it's not really the
Yeah. That
realm
would
of
get into a lot of psychology research. That's definitely an area in psychology. Gets a lot of
yeah,
attention, like automatic learning and subconscious learning, whatever you want to call it.
yeah. Um, Even I watched a little bit of this Lee Pearson lecture because I was going to go to the thing today, but I forgot. I mean, I slept in. But yeah, he was talking about how like in this lecture I was watching how even the answers, even the questions we asked are formed by our subconscious. And so when I'm asking myself a question, which is what thought is, even that's formed by the subconscious. And when I get an answer, the subconscious gives me the answer. So there's actually very little that we have in volitional control. Um, the thing we can do is like pause and observe our own thought process, but everything from asking the question to answering it is like non-volitional in a sense. At least that's what I got. I'm not sure if that's a full interpretation.
I
So it's all
kind of, I mean, minor disagreements, but I think that's kind of a takeaway point. Yeah. I think always the more important point is that our volitional control is what makes a huge difference. And regardless of how many things have automatic processes, we can be in control of our thinking in enough of a way that we're like thinking of ourselves as a whole, not just, oh, what are we as thinking, totally volitional in every single, in only our volitional aspects. Like there's more to us than just the mere volition. I mean, it's what allows us to interact with reality successfully in a healthy way and all these other things and being able to identify and guide our behavior and thinking and all that. So even if there's a lot of non-volitional stuff, it, it is still critical to control everything to the degree that you can. It will shape your everything else underneath it.
right. I will. So a
I
lot of that
listened
still
to
isn't fully clear to me. Like it's not that I get some of it, but it's still pretty. I don't feel like they say volition is self-evident, but I honestly I'm not sure because as in when I ask myself, I'm like, okay, is when I ask myself a question, is that volitional? But how do I know that my subconscious hasn't given me the content of the questions? Like in that sense, it's not self-evident to me that I'm volitional fully. Like this is going back to the previous chapter, but you know what I mean? Like all of this discussion is still I get some of it and I get that I see myself pausing and going, okay, well, instead of doing this thing that I was about to do, I can stop myself because I want that goal or whatever. But it's still not that clear what it is, how much of it I have, like, can I know it? Is it self-evident? It's not self-evident to me is the main thing.
Yeah, I can see why it would be that way. I think it could really only be self-evident for long-term action. I don't think you could really even say that about, say, you go out to eat lunch. Like sometimes when I eat lunch, I think I have like control of it. On another level, it just seems like it's just happening, and it doesn't bother me. It's okay. But then when I can think about, say, setting goals, like that I want to be a psychologist. I mean, it's almost self-evident that's the what I've been considering and thinking and putting myself in environments to work with that. It seems like I know you could come with an argument against that too, but it's hard to say why it's self-evident other than you know that you can think about, like, watch yourself when you think about comparing two different things. Like, don't worry about just the thought popping in your head. That's one thing. But once you continue from there, like you're comparing two things in front of you, just like maybe look at two different books and
Yep.
you can see how those initial concepts pop up, but then you can compare them. Or when doing math problems, then you can really notice yourself doing work. Those are the best examples I can give. Like when I
Yeah.
try to do math, I'm like, I'm not an expert at it, but like I need to study it, and I see myself like really comparing ideas and comparing concepts in ways that I wouldn't if I would be like eating lunch or taking a walk outside. It feels very different.
Right. Yeah, it's something I'll probably write about it a bit later and see if I can like once you write, you realize how unclear you are, because then it's all in front of you. So I'll write about it later, like the free will and trying to concretize specifics. But yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I said that because of that explanation you gave earlier. It's like I didn't fully get it.
Mm-hmm. I listened to the previously Pearson lecture. I mean, I liked what he said, and I agreed with a lot of it. And even the names he mentioned, I like as far as psychology research
Mm.
about perception psychology and things like that. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything about him, any published works really. Like I'll have to email him and see if he has things I'm just not finding.
Yeah,
Like
me
I'm
neither.
curious if he's written. I know he's a professor at a university near me.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Do you know
um,
he had
Farley
one paper?
Dickinson University.
He wrote a paper in 2005. I looked it up, but it was less interesting to me because I'm only interested purely. You'll
Yeah,
probably be more interested from the research aspect, but for
yeah.
me, one of the things he wrote, did a speech on was introspection and using it to improve your thought processes. I watched part of it, but it was still pretty hard to like abstract away and go, okay, well, how do I actually apply this in every issue I have? That wasn't clear to me. So, but the paper I did find that he wrote in 2005, which is ages ago, he wrote it with a. It's really weird because it's not weird. It's cool. There's a guy called Monroe Trout, and Monroe Trout was interviewed in a book called Market Wizards by Jack Schwager, which was about like hedge fund traders and traders and this kind of thing. And he retired. He made like 900 million and retired or something. And he's big on objectivism. So I don't think that's a coincidence that Monroe Trout, it had no other information about Monroe Trout in there, but I just saw the name. I'm like, hang on a second. And Monroe Trout worked with a guy called Victor Niederhofer who started NCZ Commodities. And they also churned out like all these billionaires, this company. And Niederhofer is also very into objectivism. He was running a junto in New York that had, you know, meetings every month. He's pretty old now, so he's not doing anything. But yeah, it's funny all these like coincidental connections. But yeah, so Monroe Trout is listed on that paper as well, the one he wrote about
Interesting.
the function of volition.
Yeah, I mean, I
You
couldn't find much of his credentials since he's a professor now, but listening to him, it's not like he was off base on anything. It's not like he was some kook or something. Like he knew the stuff in a competent academic way. So
hmm. Yeah, but it was I watched a little bit on the one on
yeah,
introspection, and he mentioned a couple of things that were interesting, like um, brain. He was talking about Kahneman and Tversky actually, systems ones and system two, and he said they're
yep.
right, but what they miss is volition. So in our default state, the brain can operate that way, but he makes a distinction of brain over mind and mind over brain, and so he gave the example of like, okay, so if I ask you, um, what's an example? What does TOAST spell?
Toast,
What do you put in a toaster?
toast,
Do you really put toast in a toaster? What you get
toast.
if you put
I
toast in a
put bread in
toaster?
a toaster.
So that's brain over mind. And then he gives the
Yeah,
example of you can, through a process of introspection, you can overwrite that cognitive bias. And the process of
yeah.
introspection is a volitional aspect. So then if I ask you, what does SILK spell?
SIL, silk.
What did cows drink?
Cows drink water.
I actually said milk on the second time
I
as well.
almost did. I almost said
But
milk,
the point he was
guys.
making is that he gave a few more examples like that, which I found fascinating. And he even gave one about like calculating something in a how many things in like a disc or recorder, and like if your brain is churning, you're doing it wrong. And so the point he was making, there's brain over mind, which is what Kahneman and Tversky captured, but there's mind over brain, which is involves volition. But I had a lot of trouble finding like how do I actually apply that to everything I'm doing. I with those simple examples, it's always obvious. But all that stuff was super fascinating. It's just, so that was in the introspection lecture he did. Um, but
Yeah,
if you join them, yeah, if you
to
join
learn
the
what those are.
meetups,
Go ahead.
yeah, if you join the meetups, you can ask questions. So they're a decent portion of Q&A.
Yeah, the book Thinking Fast and Slow deals with a lot of kind of examples like that. Maybe not those exactly what Pearson's talking about, but those sort of questions, what you might do automatically, but if you slowed down, you would change your mind about it. You would come to a different conclusion.
Mm.
A lot of things like that.
Exactly.
Like estimating risk. Usually in small numbers, people are bad at estimating risk. And bigger numbers, they exaggerate risk sometimes.
Right. Okay, let's go to what's this? This I think we sort of discussed this. So the ideas and value judgments at the root of a feeling may be true or false. They may be the product of meticulous logic or a slapdash mess. Okay, cool. Um, Let me see. Yeah, I was getting confused with the term value judgment because I thought the value judgment is the product of an evaluation, whereas the emotion or the emotion or the root of a feeling, no, the root of a feeling would be a premise, and the result of the feeling would be a value judgment. And I was just trying to get my head around like,
Yeah, I think you have it backward. Like the value judgment is the evaluation. That's the conscious thing. And the emotions are the automatization of that judgment. Like
okay,
you judge spiders as bad. Like
yeah,
that's a conscious judgment.
okay,
And then
okay,
eventually if you automatize it, then it can produce an emotion that a fearful emotion
got it.
after judging it as bad.
So the content, not maybe I'm getting myself confused here, but the premise of an emotion can be a value judgment. That's sort of that's what a premise can be, right? It's a value. Spiders are bad. That's a premise.
Yes,
Yeah,
that would
okay,
be a
and that's a value.
premise.
Bad for me is the implied um, thing. And
Yes.
can there also be like can I hold premises? I guess this is sort of what's being said about an implicit philosophy, but can I hold premises that are not value judgments and then they turn into value judgments through like a situation where I respond to something? Like for example, just I guess I got to think of an example, but um, I can't think of one. But like information, I wonder if there's always got to be a conscious evaluation in order to turn metaphysical judgments, not value judgments, metaphysical judgments into an actual value judgment, or the emotions can just generalize it.
I don't really know. I think that's a good way to ask the question that can there be emotions that aren't a result of any conscious evaluation? Probably. I would think it depends on many factors, of course, but I think you could if it's an unanalyzed sense or feeling of something. It's kind of like a thought, but kind of not, and just kind of there, kind of not. Like that's the best way to describe it. Like just a sense of something being a factor. And then it can be kind of become an emotion, like in a very vague, weird way. Just like whatever that feeling might be of like confusion or having a thought but not knowing what it is really, and just it manifests as an emotion. It's just messy, is the way I'm thinking of it. Like if you had some messy thoughts like that, were not well organized and things like that, I think it could manifest as an emotion, even when you don't have any particular concept to or particular premise about it. Like
Yeah, I
we were
mean, well,
talking about
actually, that's an example. Let's go with, I know you didn't mean this, but let's say people are disorganized. Let's just say that as a
yeah,
principle, and you've internalized that. That's
yeah.
I don't know if that is that a value judgment yet? Because I don't yet consciously people are disorganized. Maybe in some contexts that might become a
Yeah.
value judgment, but on its own, is it a
Yes.
value judgment? It
No,
is.
not on its own. It's just a description. Some people are disorganized. I mean, maybe they're bad, maybe they're good, maybe
Right,
no difference, nothing. Like
right.
it's not really a judgment yet. You need to. It's more than just a statement. It's a judgment that's good or bad or neutral. A judgment either some way or another,
Good or bad for me, essentially,
or
or for
whatever it
some.
might. Just a judgment as good, bad, whatever standard they want. Just good or bad, or anything they want.
Um, Well, I guess okay, so let's say that's a metaphysical judgment. We're not a value judgment. I'm not sure if that distinction is right, but
Well,
let's
metaphysical judgment may be like there is no order to reality, or there is no such thing as certainty, or I don't know if I live in a simulation or not. Things like that I could call metaphysical value
okay,
judgment. They're judgments about the nature of reality and
got
at a
it.
fundamental level.
Okay, so it's not a right distinction. But okay, so let's say that's the fact. We know
Okay.
we hold the premise that most people are disorganized. That's just very general and broad.
Yeah.
It's not yet a value judgment because we haven't said anything in relation to us. So we hold that premise. Does
Right.
it then become like let's say I've invited someone I've just met out um, to come meet me and meet for a coffee and they're running 5 minutes late and they haven't said anything yet. And then does it become a value judgment then? I'm like, oh, this person is disorganized, is going to make me wait 20 minutes. Like, is that what you get what I'm saying? Like suddenly
Yeah.
the
You
premise has
can.
become a
It could become. It could start to become then a value journey. You might say that, oh, this one person is well. All people like this are going to be like, oh, I don't like anybody that does this, and then you overgeneralize say, oh, all people like this are all disorganized people are bad people. Like you're overgeneralizing, and it's like then if you see someone's like room there, they didn't make their bed or something, and it's like you're a terrible human being just only judging from that. Like would that be proper? Probably not. But yeah,
so
it's building up these experiences, considering them, and then making a judgment about it.
this is painful to do, just to think about. Okay, let's go with your example of a messy bed. So we
Yeah.
start with the judgment. We have a judge, like not a judgment. We start with some. It's not even. I don't know if it's an evaluation, but let's say an observation. Maybe it is a judgment actually. We say most people are disorganized, so it's like a fact. It's like a statistic. It's not yet a value judgment because it doesn't mean anything in relation to our values yet.
Right.
But you then walk into the room. You see uh, bed that's not whatever it is called folded or whatever, and then your mind thinks by association, organization, disorganization, has some associative relationship to like whether someone makes their bed or not, and then you consciously, I wonder if you then consciously make that evaluation of this person is disorganized, and then from there it becomes a value judgment. Is that does that make sense? Like I'm just trying to get the relationship between knowledge of fat the relationship between our observation of the our see I can't even trying to find words here our like judgment of things in the world and then them becoming value judgments like them still having huge weight in terms of shaping our emotions. Does that make any
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think you're right. Like on terms of like once you make the association to say disorganization that this person like something about the disorganization leads you to judge it as bad. I mean, not to the bare fact people are disorganized doesn't tell you anything. You have to take then more information, like say, are disorganized people naturally violent or something? Like that could be like a, then you might say, yes, they are, therefore disorganization is bad. And then you have a negative emotion towards disorganization.
But you don't even have to say, maybe you don't need, let's go with another example that's more interesting too. Is like, remember I was telling you about in Musashi, there was this thing, and this happened in Fountainhead as well. But in Musashi, there was this lady who would go, I don't know if I told you this actually, but there was this lady who would go from like shrine to shrine to shrine. And she was described by one of the priests as a good person. By good, he meant the kind of person who goes from shrine to shrine to shrine because they want to get rid of guilt about being about to do something terrible. And then in the Fountainhead, there is what is his name? Stoddard. He builds the temple because he's so guilty about the money he's made, right? So you can generalize, like, let's say you see someone and that you meet someone and they're constantly going to all these different churches and spiritual retreats. Like you could generalize and say, oh, maybe they're a bad person, right?
Yeah, you could generalize in some way, yeah.
And then so where am I going with this? The observation was people who go to a lot of churches or spiritual places have something wrong with them. I guess that's well, that is a value judgment, right?
Yeah, I mean, you just need something to bring you to that association, something to make you go from, people who go, some people, this woman goes to temples a lot, to the conclusion, a judgment that she's a good person. You would have to have something connecting the two things. Like it could be that you learn from other priests that being good to God depends on going to temples, or that a good person is one who stays dedicated to something no matter the cost. And you could connect that always going to temples so frequently makes them good. And then you're just like, oh, then you're judging the action of going to temples as good. You learned something, like, or maybe you learned that everyone you've seen going to temples a lot was a genius or something. It's like, and that makes you think, oh, I like geniuses. And then you can start thinking like, oh, going to temples is good. I judge that as good because I see what it leads to. It's just something to make the association or the connection from the fact that you observe to some later conclusion is maybe the best way I can put it.
Yeah, it's it's confusing to get into. I guess in those instances, I gave a bad example because in that case, you're starting with a generalization that is a value judgment. But I can see, I guess what I was trying to originally find out by getting into this whole thing is like, do all judgments about reality have consequences in value judgments? So like with any generalization that you have, will it then affect your value judgments? And I'm sort of seeing like in the cases where some specific thing in reality fits into that generalization, then it can be a value judgment can be made. I don't know if that's clear, but like in the case of the disorganization thing, like, you start out saying most people are disorganized, still has no bearing on you, but then you meet someone and you observe what you think is disorganization and they're your friend, and you're like, okay, this is bad for me. And then that's it becomes a value judgment. So whatever facts you store about reality can become whatever generalized facts you store about reality can then become a negative evaluation or a value judgment. But it seems like there's still a lot of a conscious process in making those connections. And like we have the ability to introspect and evaluate whether it's true or not. It's a mouthful, but.
Yeah, I think you're onto the right. I think, there's has to be a lot of conscious process in the value judgment. Like it's not just something that happens. Like the judgment is that whatever that conscious evaluation is. And there might be lots of value judgments already that you're using to reach that conclusion or feeling about something. But It's not like you can have all your ideas come out of nothing from nowhere. Like you have your whole personal history that, yeah, there'll be some other value judgments that you can throw in there that influence your later value judgments. But at some level, you would understand that they're based on some fact, and you're taking that fact to make like a moral judgment or a judgment about it. It's like the is-ought problem. Like you can have the facts as they are,
Yeah.
but then how do you get to the, oh, this is good for me? And not only are we saying, is it good or bad for me, but like, are you judging it as a whole, like the thing itself? Like, how do we judge that apples are good or bad? It's the same as the is-ought problem.
Okay. So I guess, yeah, my question. Okay, so my question can basically be reduced to exploring the is-ought problem and then trying to think about how facts can affect evaluations. Which I don't. Is that in the book? I can't remember. I briefly remember
No,
some.
but Peacock wrote an essay once called Facts and Values that would
Okay.
be pretty much this.
Is it too? Do you reckon it's too off topic to go into that now in this emotion as products of idea section?
I think it's more applicable to if you want to get more into ethics, then it would be more relevant.